Homeless girl playing piano in the rain. What Elton John did next shocked everyone. The first drops of rain splattered against the weathered grand piano, abandoned months ago on the edge of Central Park. Most pedestrians hurried past, collars turned up against the gathering storm. But not Elton John. The music legend had paused mid-conversation with his security detail, transfixed by the haunting melody cutting through the city noise. "Wait," Elton whispered, raising a hand. "Do you hear that?" Through the intensifying downpour, a figure hunched over the keys. A girl, perhaps 17, her thin frame drowning in a tattered army surplus jacket. Despite the rain plastering her dark hair to her face, her fingers danced across the ivories with extraordinary precision, coaxing out a hauntingly familiar ballad, one of his own, in fact, with such soul that it seemed to momentarily silence the bustling Manhattan backdrop. "I need to see this," Elton murmured, motioning his team to hang back as he approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt the mesmerizing performance. The girl didn't notice him at first. Her eyes remained closed, shoulders swaying slightly with each emotional phrase. Up close, Elton could see how the rain had soaked through her clothes, how her fingertips were reddened from the cold. A small, weather-beaten backpack rested against the piano leg. Everything she owned, he guessed. When the final notes faded into the patter of raindrops, Elton stepped forward, applauding softly. The girl's eyes snapped open, startled, and immediately wary. She grabbed her backpack in one fluid motion, clearly preparing to flee. Then recognition dawned on her face, her mouth falling open in shock. "That was extraordinary," Elton said warmly. "I'm Elton John," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I know who you are. I've played your songs my whole life, and you play them brilliantly," he replied with genuine admiration. "What's your name?" She hesitated, one foot already stepping back. "Elise," she finally answered. "Elise, I'd love to talk with you for a minute, if that's okay. Maybe somewhere dry?" He gestured toward a nearby cafe. The disbelief in her eyes was unmistakable. Elton could see her calculating, weighing whether this was actually happening, or some cruel hallucination brought on by hunger and cold. "This isn't real," she said suddenly. "You're not really here." Elton smiled gently. "I assure you I am. And I rarely stand in the rain unless something truly exceptional catches my attention." A crack of thunder punctuated his words, and the downpour intensified. Elise glanced at the darkening sky, then back at Elton and his waiting team. "One coffee," she conceded reluctantly. "Though I probably smell terrible." The cafe was nearly empty, steamy windows creating a cocoon against the storm outside. Elton watched as Elise wrapped her hands around the mug, thawing her fingers. His security maintained a respectful distance, ensuring their privacy while keeping curious onlookers at bay. "How long have you been playing?" Elton asked after she'd taken a few sips. "Since I was 4, she replied, eyes fixed on the table. "My mom was your biggest fan. She taught me all your songs first." "Was." The single word hung between them. "She died 3 years ago. Cancer." Elise's voice remained flat, practiced at hiding the pain. "Dad couldn't cope. Started drinking. Lost his job, then our apartment. He's somewhere. Last I saw him was about 8 months ago. And you've been on your own since then?" Elton kept his tone gentle, non-judgmental. Elise shrugged. "Foster care for a while. Didn't stick. Better on my own." "Better playing piano in the rain?" Elton asked softly. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Your music reminds me of her. When I play, it's like she's still with me somehow." Elton nodded, removing his signature-tinted glasses to wipe away moisture. Not all of it from the rain. What Elise didn't know was that he had been on his way to a private event, but his plans were rapidly changing with each passing moment. "That piano out there," Elton said carefully. "It's been sitting there for months." "Do you play there often?" "When I can," Elise admitted. "The security guards usually chase me away, but today they were busy with the rain. I heard it calling to me, you know? Couldn't help myself." As she spoke, Elton discreetly texted his manager. "Cancel tonight. Found something more important." Little did Elise know that this chance encounter in the rain would become the most shocking moment of her life, and one that would soon captivate millions around the world. The bell above the cafe door jingled, sending Elise's eyes darting anxiously toward the entrance. Her body tensed, ready to bolt. A man in a sleek black suit entered, scanning the room until his gaze settled on their table. "David," Elton acknowledged with a nod as his manager approached. Change of plans tonight. David's expression shifted from confusion to recognition as he assessed Elise. Her damp clothes, the wariness in her posture, the way her fingers still absent-mindedly tapped out a melody on the tabletop. "Sir, the foundation gala starts in 2 hours," David reminded him quietly. "The donors are expecting—" "They'll understand," Elton interrupted, his tone making it clear the decision was final. "We have something more pressing." Elise glanced between them, suddenly uncomfortable. "I should go. You obviously have somewhere important to be, and Where will you go?" Elton asked directly. The question hung in the air. Elise's silence was answer enough. "Look," Elton continued, "I don't mean to overstep, but talent like yours, it shouldn't be left in the rain." David cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we could arrange a proper audition through the Foundation's youth program? Next week, maybe?" "Next week," Elise repeated with a hollow laugh. "Sure, I'll just put it in my calendar between find food and avoid getting mugged." The bitter edge in her voice surprised even herself. She stood abruptly, slinging her backpack over one shoulder. "Thanks for the coffee, Mr. John. It was surreal meeting you." "Wait," Elton said, also rising. "I didn't mean to offend you." "You didn't," she replied, her voice softening. "But I'm not a charity case. I don't need famous people feeling sorry for me." What happened next shocked everyone in the cafe. Elton John, 6-time Grammy winner, Knight of the British Empire, and global superstar, removed his coat and handed it to his manager. Then he walked over to the cafe's small upright piano tucked in the corner, a worn instrument primarily used for ambient weekend performances. "Play with me," he said simply, patting the bench beside him. Elise froze halfway to the door. "What? You played my song beautifully in the rain. I'd like to hear what we sound like together." His fingers pressed gently on the keys, the opening notes of Your Song filling the small cafe. The other patrons turned, phones already emerging to capture the surreal moment. Elise remained rooted in place, caught between her pride and the magnetic pull of the music. "I don't do parlor tricks," she said quietly, but her resistance was weakening. "Neither do I," Elton replied without stopping. "This isn't about pity, Elise. It's about music, just music." Something in his words reached her. Slowly, she set down her backpack and crossed to the piano, sliding onto the bench beside one of her musical idols. Her fingers joined his on the keys, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as they found their rhythm together. What began as the familiar melody evolved into something more complex, a conversation between musicians. Elise improvised passages that complemented Elton's playing, adding depths and flourishes that made the cafe owner stop wiping glasses to listen in awe. When they finished, the small crowd erupted in applause. Elise's cheeks flushed, unaccustomed to the attention. "You've had classical training," Elton observed quietly. "Beyond what your mother taught you." Elise nodded reluctantly. "Juilliard pre-college program. Before everything fell apart." "What happened?" She bit her lip. "Mom got sick. Couldn't work. I deferred to take care of her, but the medical bills..." She shrugged. "After she died, there was nothing left. No house, no piano, no money for school. Dad tried for a while, but..." The pain in her eyes told the rest of the story. "Come to the gala tonight," Elton said suddenly. David, who had been listening nearby, nearly choked. "Sir, I don't think..." "Not as a guest," Elton clarified. "As a performer." Elise's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious. The Elton John AIDS Foundation hosts some of the most influential people in the music industry. People who fund scholarships, who open doors. But I don't have anything to wear," she protested weakly. "I haven't practiced properly in months." "Leave that to us," Elton said, his eyes twinkling with determination. "What you just showed me tells me everything I need to know." David was already on his phone, his expression a mixture of resignation and excitement. Elise looked down at her worn jeans, her threadbare jacket, then back at Elton John, a man who had faced his own demons and rebuilt his life in the public eye. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why me?" Elton's expression grew serious. "Because 30 years ago, I was spiraling into addiction and darkness, and someone reached out a hand when I needed it most. Sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason." What Elise couldn't possibly know was that Elton had received devastating news that morning. News that had sent him walking through Central Park alone, contemplating mortality and legacy. Her music had broken through his private grief, reminding him of something essential he'd nearly forgotten, but she sensed something deeper was happening, even if she didn't understand what. And for the first time in years, Elise felt something dangerous flicker in her chest. Hope. Okay, she whispered, but if this is some elaborate prank show, I'm going to be really annoyed. Elton laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound. My dear, even I couldn't script something this perfect. As they rose from the piano bench, neither noticed the man who had been filming their impromptu duet from the corner, a video that was already beginning its viral journey across the internet with the caption, "Homeless Girl and Elton John's unbelievable cafe duet." In less than an hour, their private moment would belong to the world, and the world was about to be shocked even further. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. In the penthouse suite of the Ritz-Carlton, a team of stylists worked their magic while Elise stood before the mirror, barely recognizing herself in the elegant black gown. Her hair, once matted from the rain, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders. The hands that had endured cold nights and harsh weather were manicured, though she had refused to let them remove every callus. "Those are my piano hands," she'd insisted. "5 minutes, Sir Elton," an assistant called through the door. Elise's stomach clenched with anxiety. "I can't do this," she whispered. "All those people, they'll know I don't belong." Elton, already dressed in a characteristically flamboyant suit, met her eyes in the mirror. "Everyone in that ballroom has a story, Elise. Some were born into privilege, others clawed their way up. The only difference is most of them have learned to hide their scars better." He gently turned her to face him directly. "When you play tonight, don't hide yours. Let them see who you really are." The elevator ride down to the ballroom was silent, Elise's mind racing through the piece they'd decided on. Her own arrangement of Elton's "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me," interwoven with classical elements that showcased her training. The ballroom doors opened, revealing a sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. Conversations hushed momentarily as Elton entered with the unknown young woman at his side. Whispers began immediately. "We go on in 20 minutes, Elton murmured, guiding her toward the bar. "Water?" Elise nodded gratefully, then nearly dropped the glass when she overheard a woman nearby. "That's her, the homeless pianist from the video. It's already hit 5 million views." Her eyes widened in horror. "Video? What video?" Elton looked equally surprised as David hurried over, phone in hand. "Sir, you might want to see this." On the screen was their cafe performance, captured from multiple angles and expertly edited together. The comment section overflowed with reactions. "Who is this girl? She's playing with Elton John like it's nothing. From the streets to playing with a legend. I'm crying. Elton has always discovered amazing talent. Watch this space." But it was the last frame of the video that made Elise's blood run cold. A still photograph of her playing that rain-soaked piano in the park. Underneath, someone had added text. "Elise Winters, former Juilliard prodigy, now homeless after family tragedy." "How did they—" she breathed, the room suddenly spinning. "Social media investigators," David explained grimly. "Once the cafe video went viral, they pieced together your story from old Juilliard recital programs and local news stories about your mother's battle with cancer." Elise felt naked, exposed, her private pain laid bare for public consumption. "I need air," she gasped, pushing through the crowd toward the terrace. Outside in the cool night air, she gripped the railing, trying to steady her breathing. The New York skyline sparkled before her, indifferent to her crisis. "Elise?" She turned to find an elderly man in an impeccable tuxedo watching her with kind eyes. "My name is Robert Sheffield," he said gently. "I'm the Dean of Juilliard." Her heart sank further. "Dr. Sheffield, We've been looking for you," he interrupted. "When you didn't return after your deferment, we tried to contact you. Your father's phone was disconnected." Elise swallowed hard. There was no money for tuition. It seemed pointless to explain. "Your mother was beloved at the school," he said. "She taught many of our faculty before her illness. Did you know your scholarship was still valid?" The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "We never rescinded it, Elise. We simply couldn't find you." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. All those nights on friends' couches, in shelters, eventually on the streets, all while her path back to music had remained open. If only she'd known. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Because I saw the video," he admitted, "and because Elton called me." Before she could process this, the terrace door opened again, and a man stumbled out, unshaven, wearing a kitchen staff uniform that didn't quite fit. His eyes were bloodshot but clear, searching the terrace frantically until they landed on her. Ellie, the voice she hadn't heard in 8 months. The nickname only one person used. Dad, he took an uncertain step forward, then another. I saw you. On a phone in the kitchen. Someone was watching that video. His voice broke. You're playing again. She couldn't move. Frozen between the past she'd lost and the future suddenly, dizzyingly possible again. I'm 6 months sober, he said, words tumbling out. Working in kitchens. Nothing fancy, but I've been looking for you. Checking shelters, asking around. Tears streamed down his weathered face. I thought I'd lost you too. Something cracked inside Elise. A wall she'd built to survive. She took one hesitant step toward him, then another, until suddenly she was in his arms, sobbing against his shoulder like the child she hadn't allowed herself to be since her mother died. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair over and over. I'm so sorry. From the doorway, Elton watched silently, his own eyes damp. Beside him, David cleared his throat. Sir, it's time. Inside, the MC was already announcing, Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Elton John and his special guest. Elise pulled back from her father's embrace, panic flashing across her features. I can't go on now. Not like this. Her father squeezed her shoulders gently. Your mother always said you played best when your heart was full. He brushed a tear from her cheek. Show them who you are, Ellie. Elton stepped forward, extending his hand. Sometimes the universe breaks us so we can be rebuilt into something stronger, he said softly. Tonight isn't just about music anymore. It's about showing the world that second chances are real. A strange calm settled over Elise as she took his hand. Will you change the program? To what? Sorry seems to be the hardest word, she said, with a meaningful glance toward her father. I think I need to play that tonight. As they walked back into the ballroom, heading for the grand piano on the stage, the crowd parted before them. But Elise no longer felt like an imposter. She carried her story with her now, not as a burden, but as a gift. What happened in the next 10 minutes would not only shock everyone in attendance, but would change the course of countless lives, including one watching from backstage who had no idea he was about to receive the greatest shock of all. The spotlights dimmed throughout the ballroom, leaving only a single beam illuminating the grand piano. Elise took her seat, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes upon her. Elton settled beside her on the bench, his presence both reassuring and surreal. Ladies and gentlemen, Elton addressed the crowd, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hushed room. Tonight I had planned to thank you all for your generous support of the foundation and play a few crowd favorites. He paused, his eyes finding Elise's father standing uncertainly at the back of the room. But sometimes life has other plans. Today I was reminded that music isn't just entertainment. It's survival. It's how we find each other in the dark. He turned to Elise with a gentle nod, and their hands met the keys together. The opening notes of Sorry seems to be the hardest word filled the space, but this wasn't the version everyone knew. Elise's classical training transformed the melody, weaving complex emotional layers through Elton's familiar chords. Her technique was flawless, but it was the raw emotion flowing through her playing that held the room spellbound. As they reached the chorus, Elton began to sing, his legendary voice carrying decades of his own pain and redemption. Without warning, he shifted on the bench, hands leaving the keys, giving the piano entirely to Elise while he continued to sing. The crowd gasped at the seamless transition. Elise's playing expanded to fill the space he had left, her fingers crafting a masterpiece of technical brilliance and emotional truth. This wasn't just accompaniment. It was a conversation between artists, between generations, between different kinds of pain. In the back of the room, her father covered his mouth with his hand, tears streaming freely down his face. But the true shock came when, during the final chorus, Elton stopped singing and nodded to Elise. She took a deep breath and began to sing herself, a clear, strong voice that had never been heard in public before, the voice her mother had trained alongside her piano skills, before cancer had stolen everything. And sorry seems to be the hardest word. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, the emotion almost overwhelming her. But instead of detracting from the performance, that small crack seemed to break something open in the room. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience as the final notes faded away. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before the crowd erupted, rising to their feet in thunderous applause. Elton stood first, offering Elise his hand as she rose shakily from the bench. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced over the continuing ovation, remember this night. Remember the name Elise Winters, because you've just witnessed the beginning of an extraordinary journey. The applause grew even louder, but Elise was looking past the front rows to her father's tear-streaked face. In that moment, she knew the performance hadn't just been about her talent. It had been about forgiveness, about rebuilding what had been broken. As Elton guided her off the stage, they were immediately surrounded by industry executives, scholarship directors, and music producers, all clamoring to speak with the night's revelation. Ms. Winters, we'd like to discuss a recording contract, immediate opening in our summer program, opportunity to tour with... It was overwhelming, but David expertly managed the crowd, creating space for Elise to breathe. Through the sea of faces, she spotted Dr. Sheffield making his way toward her, her father beside him. That was extraordinary, the dean said, genuine awe in his voice. Your place at Juilliard will be waiting whenever you're ready, but I suspect you'll have quite a few options to consider now. Before she could respond, a tall, distinguished man with a British accent cut through the crowd. Excuse me, but I need a word with Sir Elton and Ms. Winters immediately. It's rather urgent. Elton recognized him instantly. Richard, what are you doing here? I thought you were in London. I was, the man replied grimly, until I saw the viral video and recognized Ms. Winters. Elise frowned. I'm sorry, have we met? Richard shook his head. No, but I've spent the last 3 years searching for you. He turned to her father. And for you, Mr. Winters. Her father stepped closer, confusion written across his face. Why would you be looking for us? Because, Richard said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Marianne Winters was my sister. The shock silenced everyone. Elise felt the room tilt. That's not possible, her father said hoarsely. Marianne had no siblings. She grew up in the foster system. Half siblings, Richard corrected. Same father, different mothers. I only discovered her existence 5 years ago through a DNA ancestry test. By the time I tracked her down, she was already ill. His voice softened. She asked me not to contact you then. She didn't want charity from a stranger during her final months. But she left this with her attorney for me to deliver to Elise when she turned 18. With trembling hands, Elise opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a bank statement. She knew what was coming, Richard explained gently. She made me promise to find you after she was gone, to make sure you could continue your music. But when I finally located your last known address, you had both disappeared. He looked at Elton with profound gratitude. Until today's video led me here. Elise stared at the bank statement in disbelief. It showed a trust fund in her name, enough to cover not just her education but years of stable living while she built her career. Mom knew, she whispered. She knew we'd fall apart without her. She planned for it, Richard confirmed. And she made me promise that if I found you, I would be there for you both. He extended his hand to her father. We're family, whether you knew it or not. Elton, who had been watching this unfold with astonishment, placed a gentle hand on Elise's shoulder. The universe works in mysterious ways, my dear. The media frenzy that followed was inevitable. Homeless piano prodigy's miraculous night with Elton John became the headline of the week. The original cafe video reached 50 million views within days. Offers and opportunities flooded in. Record deals, scholarships, reality show proposals, documentary requests. But Elise chose her path carefully. With Elton's guidance as her newly appointed mentor, she accepted a recording contract that allowed her to complete her education first. Her debut album would wait until she was ready. 6 months later, in a sold-out benefit concert at Carnegie Hall, Elise took the stage. No longer a homeless girl playing piano in the rain, but an artist claiming her rightful place in the world. In the front row sat her father, now working as an addiction counselor helping others find their way back. Beside him, her uncle Richard, the family she never knew she had. And next to them, Sir Elton John, beaming with pride. As her fingers touched the keys for the opening notes of her first original composition, Rain's Sonata, she glanced up at the ceiling of the hallowed hall and whispered, "This one's for you, Mom." What began as a chance encounter in the rain had become so much more, a story of loss and recovery, of music's power to connect souls across all barriers, and a reminder that sometimes our darkest moments are simply the prelude to our greatest triumphs. Backstage after the standing ovation, Elton embraced her. "You've come a long way from that piano in the park." Elise smiled, tears of joy in her eyes. "No, I haven't," she replied. "I'm exactly where I was always meant to be."